Joe Biden begins his re-election campaign, Donald Trump is trying his luck once again at the presidential elections amid several indictments. The governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, is another likely contender that will go head-to-head with Trump among the Republicans. As usual, national polls are hard at work conducting and, more importantly, publishing opinion polls trying to determine or portray what is on the American public's mind. Joe Biden seems to be getting off to a rough start with his approval ratings at an all-time low and his competitors criticizing him for his competence and old age. Partisan Bickering. Gallup has been conducting presidential job approval ratings in the United States since 1937. Now that Joe Biden has started his re-election bid, his approval rating among the U.S. public has gone down to 37%, which is the lowest that Gallup has measured since his inauguration. Biden's approval rating has been in the low 40% range and even at 38% in July for the past 19 months. This last poll was completed the day he announced his re-election. Among the post-World War II U.S. presidents, only Reagan's rating was slightly lower at this point of his presidency. Donald Trump's average rating a year before the elections was 41.6%, and he did not get re-elected.
You recently launched your re-election campaign. You've said questions about your age are legitimate, and your response is always, just watch me. But the country is watching, and recent polling shows that 70% of Americans, including a majority of Democrats, believe you shouldn't run again. What do you say to them? What do you say to those Americans who are watching and aren't convinced? You've said you can beat Trump again. Do you think you're the only one?
I may not be the only one, but I know him well, and I know the danger he presents to our democracy. And we've been down this road before. And with regard to age, and polling data, I noticed the polling data I keep hearing about is that I'm between 42 and 46% favorable rating, et cetera. But everybody running for re-election in this time has been in the same position. There's nothing new about that. You're making it sound like Biden's really underwater.
The United States of America has a long history of political polarization with intense and often bitter conflicts between Republicans and Democrats. The political divide in the country has grown increasingly deep and contentious in recent years, with both parties frequently at odds over key issues in the economy, politics, healthcare, social, and climate matters. Will the elections bring about more friction between Republicans and Democrats?
The elections will definitely inflame tensions on both sides of the aisle in the United States. Between Republicans and Democrats, tensions are always increasing, and that is more so the case as Americans view the stakes to be higher as the global situation becomes more unstable. So, I think that right now in the U.S. there are constantly, brawls between different political factions, whether it be anti-fascists or Proud Boys or just protesters. For example, most policemen are Republicans, and most protesters, most anti-fascist protesters, quote unquote anti-fascist protesters, are more aligned towards liberal democratic values. And the police are constantly shooting them for protesting and killing them. One protester recently was shot 50-something times, and just for simply protesting. So I think that the situation and the political tensions in the U.S. are definitely on, high alert, as it were.
Partisan bickering and infighting have become hallmarks of American politics, with each side often accusing the other of being unreasonable and ideologically extreme. This has led to a breakdown in civility and compromise, with both parties frequently resorting to gridlock and obstructionism to advance their agendas. The result has been a government that is increasingly unable to address the pressing issues facing the country.
Definitely, these elections are going to bring more about dividing the country. Unfortunately, the ruling class here in the States has found a way to get away with people paying attention to them, but instead paying attention to each other. So when you have a government that is fueled by a propaganda-style mainstream media that is tied to corporate interests, which is the actual definition of fascism, yes, you're going to get the old school divide and conquer. And this next election cycle, that's all that's on the menu. It's more division among citizens here while pushing aside the important issues that drive our economics and our foreign policy.
Opinion polls play an important role in American politics, particularly in presidential elections. These polls measure public opinion on a range of issues, including candidate favorability, policy preferences, and presidential approval ratings. During presidential campaigns, opinion polls are closely watched as they provide insight into the preferences of the American electorate. Candidates use these polls to gauge their support and adjust their campaign strategies accordingly. What are different polls saying about the 2024 elections?
Recently, there has been a poll released by Emerson that has Biden beating Trump by about 6 points, and beating DeSantis by 2 points. So actually, no, sorry, that's DeSantis by 6 points and Trump by 2 points. So it's pretty close. With polls in the United States and presidential elections, anything can happen at any time. As we've seen in previous elections, there were WikiLeaks coming out that wildly changed the shakeup of the numbers. So I'd say that as of this moment, Biden has the lead. That could change very quickly, though, as more people announce their candidacy. I know that RFK is running now, and Marianne Williamson is running for the Democrats, which could take away from Biden's numbers quite significantly, up to maybe 5 to 10% for each. So I'd say that right now, Biden is winning, but that can change week to week.
Polls are also used by political analysts and the media to track the state of the race and make predictions about the outcome of elections. Following a presidential election, polls shift to measuring the approval ratings of the newly elected president. In recent years, presidential approval ratings have been highly polarized, with a stark partisan divide. This has been particularly evident during the presidencies of Donald Trump and Joe Biden, with approval ratings often heavily influenced by political affiliation.
Once again, when people start seeing approval ratings from Biden, and even though they are generally low, a lot of people believe that they should be even lower than they really are. Unfortunately, the way they do conduct a lot of these polls, they can control the narrative. And a lot of times they'll show approval for Joe Biden simply because there's disapproval for the other guy, Donald Trump. However, I don't think that they're going to be able to use these tactics anymore to get them over the top, because people just don't believe that Biden should have anywhere near the approval rating he has. Even though it's traditionally low, they feel the state of the country feels it should be even lower.
Opinion polls have been a source of controversy in American politics, particularly in presidential elections. One major issue with polls is that they can be influenced by a number of factors, including sample size, question wording, and the political leanings of the polling organization. These factors can lead to biased or inaccurate results that do not accurately reflect the preferences of the American electorate. Are polls in America trustworthy?
I do think polls are somewhat trustworthy, but they do have a history of inaccuracy. Most polls are from major firms are generally about 70 to 80, 90% accurate. That being said, things can change very quickly. For example, before Trump announced his first candidacy, he was polling at under 2%. After he announced, he immediately shot up by dozens of points. So I don't think they're predictive. I think they're extremely volatile. And for the most part, polls just serve to bring viewers to mainstream media.
In addition, polls can be subject to manipulation or outright fraud. There have been instances of pollsters intentionally skewing the results in order to influence public opinion or support a particular candidate or party. This has led to concerns about the reliability and validity of opinion polls, particularly in the context of high-stakes presidential elections, like how most polls in 2016 showed that Hillary Clinton will win the elections while it turned out to be false.
Well, it's interesting when you look at the polls because a lot of people don't really trust what the polls are saying anymore. The way they grab these polls are because they call people who have landlines, and most people, young people especially, in America just don't have the old school resources in which they choose to call and gather this information. Polls nowadays, especially in America, seem to just be a way of manipulating data into pushing out certain propaganda to make you believe that the rest of your citizens might be or might be against a certain candidate.
Another controversial issue with presidential opinion polls is their impact on the electoral process itself. Critics argue that polls can have a distorting effect on the election by shaping public opinion, influencing media coverage, and even affecting voter turnout. This can create a self-fulfilling prophecy in which a candidate who is perceived to be winning in the polls becomes even more popular and ultimately wins the election.
You could take the 5 worst presidents in American history and put them together, and they would not have done the damage Joe Biden has done to our nation in just a few short years, not even close. Thanks to Joe Biden's socialist spending calamity, American families are being decimated by the worst inflation in half a century. Banks are failing, our currency is crashing, and the dollar will soon no longer be the world standard, which will be our greatest defeat in over 200 years. Our cities have been overrun with homelessness, drug addicts, and violent criminals who are being released from jail en masse with no retribution whatsoever, while law enforcement is weaponized against law-abiding conservatives or Republicans or people they just don't like.
According to another poll conducted recently by Gallup, more than 4 in 5 Americans are unhappy with the current economic situation. 83% of respondents to the poll describe the economic conditions as poor or only fair. Only 16% think conditions are excellent or good, and 72% believe economic conditions are getting worse, while 23% think it is improving. What are the most important factors for voters in 2024?
The most important factor, unfortunately, in the United States happens to be all about the culture wars. People are divided amongst social issues in the United States. Unlike other countries where they might pay more attention to their foreign policy, definitely pay more attention to their manufacturing and their economics, Americans are just so caught up on the things that really don't matter in arenas that matter in other countries, and really should be more about highlighting those issues here. Unfortunately, people will be arguing more about guns, more about trans issues, more about gay rights, more about pronouns, more about those issues in which really don't matter to economics or matter to our foreign policy, which equates to who we decide can live or breathe on this planet via proxy war, hot war, sanctions, and banking loans to countries that really lock them down.
It's no wonder that Biden is receiving his lowest approval rating. In the poll by Gallup, a third of respondents cited economic problems as the number one issue the country is facing at the moment, with the high cost of living and inflation as their highest concern. Other non-economic concerns most common among respondents were the government and its poor leadership, immigration, unifying the country, and crime or violence. Surprisingly, crime and violence was only the main concern of just 3% of respondents.
I think the most important factor for voters in 2024 is 100% the economy. The economy in the US is out of control. The inflation is skyrocketing. It's something like $80 for just a bag of groceries. Rent prices are skyrocketing. Healthcare is extremely expensive. So I think that's the number one issue. And both candidates, or all candidates, are going to have their own, pitches to the American public on how to resolve that. Unfortunately, it seems like not very much is going to change. Inflation has gone down a bit, but multiple banks have collapsed recently and been seized by the US government. So the situation is quite dire, and it seems like with the sort of the collapse of US dollar hegemony on the horizon, that the situation is just going to get worse. The homeless situation is especially bad. So I think that that Americans are rightly concerned about the economy.
Now, with more than a year left to the 2024 presidential race, polls are at it again. According to WPA Intelligence, examining 7 national vote polls since mid-February, Donald Trump would lose to Biden by an average of 3.1%, while Florida Governor Ron DeSantis would win the popular vote over Biden by an average of 1.2%. Based on these polls, if the elections were held today, Donald Trump would lose to Joe Biden. Is the U.S. united or more divided?
Unfortunately, when it comes to United States citizens being united, they can sometimes emulate what our Congress does. They can be united when it comes to intervention. They can be united when it comes to war. They can be united with proxy wars against other countries. Unfortunately, where the United States people are united comes from a very bad foreign policy and a thought process that it was, birthed from the Monroe Doctrine, that the United States military and foreign policy apparatus has the right to go around and police the planet. That's the only area in which our Congress is united, and that's the only area in which our citizens are united. Now, that's a small amount of citizens that are united, the people on the fray. But the people behind closed doors, I think a lot of Americans are growing tired of our foreign policy and tired of not just wasting so much money, but so many lives. So I think there is a unification on both fronts, for and against war. But unfortunately, they only show the parties that are united for war, and they silence the parties who are against war.
A new Wall Street Journal poll on the 2024 presidential election reveals more than half of American voters viewed both the current and former presidents very unfavorably. This is while among Republicans, Ron DeSantis is trailing Donald Trump by 13 points, 51 to 38%. 70% of respondents in an NBC News poll said they did not want Biden to run for re-election, and 60% said the same about Donald Trump.
The United States is not united at all. The name is somewhat ironic at this point. People are, constantly engaging in sort of a culture information war over things like social rights, abortion. Half the country is divided on both of those. Gun laws. There are people getting murdered, mass murdered every day. School children getting murdered every week. It seems So I think that the United States is very much not divided, and even people more radical than sort of Democrats and Republicans are not united in any way at all. And unfortunately, it seems like that too is going to continue to get worse. I do believe that one thing that could help bring people together is, ironically, a fall of the economy, because people's priorities are not very much in order right now. And when they become less comfortable, it's easier to find common ground.
Fox News survey shows Donald Trump's advantage in the 2024 Republican presidential nomination race, since support for Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is slipping. The survey also reveals that Joe Biden is supported by 62% of Democratic primary voters, while Robert Kennedy Jr. is far behind at 19% and Williamson is at just 9%. In the Republican camp, Trump has 53%, DeSantis 21%, Mike Pence 6%, and Nikki Haley at 4%.
The next election really is a recipe for disaster. People in the media and in the government like to play up January 6th as if it was an actual insurrection. Being there myself, I can tell you it was not. People were just starting to peek, look inside the window, the door, or whatever analogy you want to use, at our elections. And that's what that was all about. That's why there was so much of a heavy pushback from the government and our media about this whole situation, because they don't want our citizens looking into our elections ever again. Also, they want to take advantage of a crisis and put more restrictions on our civil liberties. And why would they let that go to waste? But this particular election has a lot more at stake, because people have called BS, which means bull you know what. And they think that our election system hasn't gotten any better. In fact, there's a lot of people who think it's gotten worse. So let's not even talk about January 6th. If they cheat this next election, they might see something unprecedented like they've never seen before.
Fox News national survey shows higher approval ratings for Biden than the Gallup poll. In the survey, Biden's job performance rating held somewhat steady for more than a year at 44% approving and 56% disapproving of his performance. In the survey, 53% disapprove on national security, 54% on foreign policy, 60% on border security, and 64% disapprove of how he is handling the U.S. economy.
I think it's extremely likely that there are multiple crises that occur as a result of the increase of tensions, whether it's on the same level as people going into the Capitol building is a different story. But I do believe that it's only a matter of time until an event like that or an event similar to that happens again. And it could happen during the course of the presidential elections. People are very discontent with how things are, and it seems like both sides of the political spectrum are just interested in maintaining the status quo. And if that's the case, as I mentioned earlier, the economy is getting worse. People are very concerned about the threat of World War III. Fortunately, the Republicans are, some of them are trying to de-escalate the situation, starting to question why we're sending so much money to Ukraine, which is another very important issue for voters. Unfortunately, it does seem like the Republicans are more keen towards increasing tensions with China. So while you have the Democrats interested in the war in Russia, the Republicans are interested in the war with China. And there are very few people in between who are interested in no war at all.
A year and a half left to the 2024 election. Some of the main campaigns have started, and things are bound to get heated, getting closer to November 2024. Republicans, Democrats, and their supporters are divided on the most important issues, and this divide will reveal itself in frictions between the two camps. With all the tension and the majority of voters not wanting either Trump or Biden, Americans will probably have to brace themselves for quarrels and even conflicts in the near future.